Well, that moment has finally arrived. The World Health Organization has declared the public health emergency of the coronavirus over.
That I declare COVID-19 over.
We'd expect this to be a time when the world would breathe a sigh of relief, but that may not necessarily be the case because there's two major policies of the WHO that are coming up for review, one scheduled for May, and this could see an expansion of the powers of the WHO, which has a number of people concerned.
Brendan, I think the real reason for concern is not necessarily about the World Health Organization, but what's going on behind the scenes, or actually what's hiding in plain sight. Let's get to the details right away.
I'm Brendon Fallon.
And I'm Lee Smith.
And we're over the target. Let's start by looking at the positives of what this means, that the pandemic has been officially declared over. I'm here in Taiwan at the moment. I've just been in Australia, so one of the good things about this situation is freer travel. And is that something that you're seeing some benefit from yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking, Brendan. I mean, this is, the long punishment that's been dealt out, meted out against American citizens in particular. Many of us here in the United States, including my family, we have relatives from abroad who chose not to get the vaccine, and they weren't able to travel here. Starting Thursday, now that this ridiculous regulation has been lifted, we'll be able to see family members we haven't seen in several years. So yeah, we're celebrating it. Also with some recognition that the people who meted out this punishment are extraordinarily cruel people. And nonetheless, we rejoice that this is lifted. For sports fans, it's great. Of course, if you're a tennis fan, Novak Djokovic will again be playing in the U.S. Open. He hasn't been able to play the last couple of years again because of the same regulation. So Djokovic now, when he comes to the United States, will be celebrated by millions of Americans, and many tens of millions, maybe more, around the world for his steadfast refusal to get this vaccine. It's something that he didn't want to put in his body. He chose not to. He said, I'll sacrifice some money, sacrifice some earnings just to stand by principle. So Djokovic is, he'll be coming to the United States in August and treated, I hope, like a hero. Certainly, I look at him as a heroic figure now in this during the COVID era.
Certainly, he took a stand that the vast majority of athletes weren't prepared to take, and obviously he'll be in America much sooner than I think he'll be heading to Australia, where he certainly didn't receive a very warm welcome with the stance that he took on the vaccine. In terms of America, I know that there isn't such a silver lining in terms of what's happening at the border, or what could be happening very soon with the lifting of these pandemic restrictions.
Yeah, that's a very good point. On Thursday, with everything lifting, I mean, we're seeing reports that there are a lot of people massed at the border, and I saw one estimate that it might be close to 1 million people who might try to make a run at the border on Thursday, with with the emergency lifting, and I believe it was Title 42. That was being used to keep people out. But of course, the Biden administration, it's open borders is their immigration policy. So again, the estimate's between 3 to 6 million people who have crossed the border illegally since Joe Biden became president. And in one day on Thursday, we may see a large percentage of that 6 million cross on Thursday.
We're about to see a review of policies of the WHO, including the international health regulations and also the Pandemic Prevention Treaty. And what's concerning about the proposed revisions is that we could see an expansion of WHO powers, one, to be able to decide what constitutes a public health emergency, and the criteria for those have been expanded. So it's possible this could be interpreted, virtually anything. Like in some states in America, we've had the suggestion that racism is a public health emergency, climate change is a public health emergency.
The reality is, as we see in Washington all the time, it's true around the world. Bureaucratic failure always leads to more power. No one's ever held responsible. No one's ever held accountable for what they did wrong, for the amount of pain and suffering that they've caused. And we've seen that the World Health Organization was at the center of this chaos. And again, this is rolled into more power. Happens all the time in Washington. That's the way it goes. In fact, the famous Rahm Emanuel quote about never let a crisis go to waste, that's precisely what that is. Just reinterpreted as like, never let our failure go to waste. Let's roll our failure into more power for us. So yeah, we shouldn't be surprised, but we're going to have to fight it.
I think it's often the case, Lee, that these organizations may be very good at seizing opportunities in a crisis to advance their own ends, but actually handling the crisis seems to be more of a challenge for them. And it's ludicrous and kind of ironic that there'd be any question about expanding or a consideration of expanding WHO powers if we look at the track record of how they've handled things with the coronavirus pandemic. They took the Chinese Communist Party, which had already demonstrated its lack of reliability and trustworthiness with the SARS COVID outbreak in 2003, and took it at its word when it said the coronavirus wasn't human-to-human transmissible. We later saw the truth about that, and to this date, there's been still no holding to account of the Chinese Communist Party by the WHO for the fact that it had continued to allow international flights, knowing that it had a very dangerous virus spreading within its territory.
Yeah, the WHO substantiated the lies that the Chinese Communist Party told about about how the pandemic started, that it started in the wet markets in Wuhan. It substantiated the CCP's lies about when it started. We now know that the pandemic started much earlier, in the beginning of fall 2019, maybe even earlier. Right, and so the WHO lied about or they supported the lies told by Beijing, and this is, of course, the main reason why Donald Trump, as president, why he pulled the United States out of the World Health Organization. But of course, given the amount of money that the U.S. pays to the WHO, which is far and away the top donor, it's very hard to disentangle the United States from the WHO, even when Trump wanted to leave and officially withdrew. And so it wasn't hard when Joe Biden became president to push the U.S. back into, I think what you and I agree, and many of our viewers will agree, is not just a failed organization, but a very destructive one as well.
One of the reasons Trump cited for wanting to leave the World Health Organization was the influence that China had over it, as well as the World Health Organization's failed pandemic response. It's interesting, though, if we look at, this is a breakdown from the publication Verify, which shows the rankings of not the assessed contributions, which each member country pays according to certain criteria, but the voluntary contributions that are made by private organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's very interesting to see who the top stakeholders here are.
I think this data is key to understanding what's going on here. If we see that the United States is the number one donor, number two is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? So you're right that China does, and people are right who are worried about CCP influence over the WHO and other international organizations. But the reality remains that the United States is the main donor to the WHO, and the U.S. gets, therefore, to call a lot of the shots, as does Bill Gates. So why does China project all this influence through an organization that's basically owned by the United States and Bill and Melinda Gates?
So the concern, I think, largely through the pandemic has been China's influence over the World Health Organization, with different actions taken. For example, the investigation into the origin of the coronavirus by the World Health Organization that really didn't seem to go anywhere, and was in collaboration with the Chinese Communist Party. Who was really going to expect any results to come out of that? And with these continual developments, the question of China's influence over the World Health Organization has repeatedly been brought under scrutiny. But this introduces some other stakeholders, like the pharmaceutical companies, like the top 1%ers, like billionaires, and raises the question about how much these companies, these entities, contribute to what the World Health Organization is doing.
Yeah, I think it's important to see it in this framework. Who's spending what, and what are they getting in return from the World Health Organization. And as we've said, the Chinese Communist Party spends, on the average of a little more than $50 million a year on WHO, and they appear to project an awful lot of influence and power through that. Many people talk about how the head of the WHO, Tedros, is basically the CCP's candidate. Well, again, that may be the case. But given the amount of money that the United States pours into it, and the amount of money that U.S.-based and Western European pharmaceutical firms pour into that, shouldn't the U.S. and Western European nations, especially Germany, shouldn't they really be calling the shots here?
If you're enjoying this condensed version of this Over the Target episode on social media, you can find the full version on Epoch TV.
Watch us exclusively on Epoch TV, where you'll find not only Over the Target, but all your favorite Epoch shows.